If everyone could please take your seats, we're about to begin the next part of our program. In the next part of our program, we'll hear from 3 education experts. We're going to talk about standards and why they vary so widely, what resources are available to military families as they move from school to school, and what families can do to affect change in the classroom and beyond. But first, let's hear from another military family who shared their struggles with education through their many military moves.
We are the Smith family. We are currently stationed in Bangor, Washington. We have been in submarines, and I say we liberally because that is something that the entire family has been affected by for about 21 years.
It's pretty difficult because of course you always want the best. My biggest concern from them, because we do move typically every 2 to 3 years, is you don't know how the next location is going to compare academically to the location you're leaving. So you're never sure if your children are going to arrive ahead of where they should be or right where they should be, or they're going to be behind. We typically look at schools and then decide where we're going to live. We hope, we cross our, you don't know.
In elementary school it was easier because you're younger, but for middle school and up, I guess it's harder to make friends, especially since I'm moving, like when I first made new friends at 6th grade in middle school, and now I'm moving to another middle school.
This one especially, we let her look at the different high schools in the area that we're looking at, so she's been somewhat part of this process, where before we sort of shielded her from it, but now it's her high school experience, her last 2 years of high school, and we're letting her at least get a window into what we're looking at.
Well, I'm still not completely sure what I'm looking for exactly, but I guess the test scores, the kind of courses that they offer, and credit transferring process.
We're trying to recreate that sense of community every 2 years. That's what it really feels like.
What would be nice is if you had some type of understanding of what is the baseline, the entering argument, and then say that I know my daughter is here, and be able to say my daughter is here, and that is accepted and understood by the different schools.
It's just one of those things where you just have to make it work. I honestly couldn't tell you the specifics of what we put in place, because we're also dealing with deployments, and but we just make it work because we know it's best for the kids.
And I know a lot of people in here can relate to that make it work attitude. It was such a pleasure to get to know the Smiths, the Dueñases, who you saw in the other video at our Operation Purple family retreat. And we're about to get into our panel discussion, which will be moderated by Joyce. Before we do, I was wondering if we could get all of the school liaison officers in the audience to raise your hands. Yep. There's one right there. 2. Okay. Everyone look around. If you have any questions, just go right to 1, 2, 3. They have all the answers. And also, let's just give them a round of applause for being here today. And Joyce will also be sharing some results of our survey of 1,600 military families who shared their experiences with schools across the country. Joyce?
So, first, a little word of warning, and this is your mother speaking, get your flu shot. TRICARE offers them for free. Just go on the TRICARE website and search for flu shot. This is not the flu, this is a bad cold, but it was a good time to remind everybody to get your flu shot. Really, really glad to be here today with this wonderful panel, and I've got my Kleenex and my wipes here. So, NMFA got its start almost 50 years ago because military spouses saw a problem, in that case, the lack of DoD survivor benefits, banded together, told their stories, and urged for change. And that's what NMFA and the families we serve, do those of you, our families on the videos, we're still doing that today, working together to make things better for our children. Aside from the health of their kids, no issue is as important to military parents than quality education. Our military families don't want a parent's choice to serve our country in uniform to have a negative impact on educational quality and opportunities for their children. And given that the average military child moves so often, you heard Bessa 9 times, what's the biggest question I've heard from military families and what came through in our survey of 1,600 military families? Will my child be ready for the next semester in their current school, for the next grade in their next school, for graduation, for college, or a job after they graduate? It's often frustrating, and you heard some of that frustration in the questions this morning, for military families to realize that what their children are taught and when, how children's learning is assessed, and how their schools are resourced and held accountable are decisions that were made long before that military family arrived, and they're made at the state and local level. It's frustrating for military leaders to realize actually what little impact they can have in their communities on some of these issues around standards, assessment, resourcing, and the quality of education offered to the children of service members within their commands. As a parent whose now 33-year-old daughter attended 5 schools before 5th grade, who was taught her multiplication tables twice, the second time the response I get was, well, Mrs. Razor, we haven't taught her multiplication, so therefore she hasn't learned multiplication, and studied dinosaurs 3 years in a row, I know states have come a long way in creating and implementing standards and in looking at the alignment with those in other states, especially in math and literacy. But while most states boast about their own high standards, and more frequently than previously talk of how they align with others, military families still struggle often to find high, consistent standards applied consistently to enhance the academic progress of their children and secure that foundation for success that Megan talked about earlier. In your packets, you have that infographic we created based on the stories, the responses of more than 1,600 military family members to our survey. What did they tell us? Military families told us what the Smith and Duenas families told us on the videos. There are many factors in how they evaluate the quality of their children's education. It's the standards, it's how they're taught, what resources their kids have, the kids' schools have, what activities do the schools have, how welcoming and supportive those schools are to military children. Many of the parents who responded to our survey talked of how the military experience has made their children strong and resilient, helped them make friends easier, expose them to new and diverse experiences. But families also told us of their struggles, said, one mom, you don't know what you don't know. I thought we were in a good school in New Mexico. It was a very positive social emotional experience for my oldest in kindergarten and first. But moving to Virginia opened my eyes to true academic rigor. Our current school has been fantastic, but it's been a 2-year process to get up to grade level. In 2nd grade, there were topics in math that were a review for other students that my child had never been introduced to before. Our military service afforded my oldest the opportunity to struggle and to stress over schooling. He is stronger and more resilient now, but I wish I could have prevented that experience for him. That resonated with me and I think a lot of our team. Because of their mobility, military parents see differences in standards and the application of those standards that people in a single state legislature, school board, school, or classroom don't see. Military families know that high standards aren't really that high, if there remains variability in quality control and consistency in the application and practice of those standards. Military families' insights, therefore, can be helpful to educators and policymakers at all levels. And I think you heard that loud and clear from Ann Holton. Your input, your stories are important to decision makers. The issue is, how do we connect? Today's panel members are uniquely qualified to talk about those standards, why they're important for quality education, what military families need to know about them, and how military parents can be engaged as effective advocates about them. These panelists understand that the military family voice is an important one in decisions about school standards and quality. Their bios are in your program, so I'm just going to briefly introduce them. In the middle there is Jim Cowan. Jim is the Executive Director of the Collaborative for Student Success, a nonprofit organization dedicated to raising educational standards as an important next step in ensuring that all students are prepared to succeed at college level work. Jim also serves 10 years of active duty as an officer in the United States Navy. Chuck Clymer, to my left, is the program manager for the Navy's Child and Youth Education Services. He's responsible for ensuring high-quality K-12 educational programs are available for Navy children and leads 61 Navy school liaisons worldwide who serve military families. Chuck is a retired Air Force Command Chief Master Sergeant who's been proudly serving Navy, Marine, Air Force, and Army, and I think that's where I first met you, Chuck, as you were serving the Army, for more than 44 years. Eileen Huck, we got a little heavy on the Navy representation here today. Eileen Huck, Navy spouse, has been Deputy Director of Government Relations at NMFA since 2012. She's our subject matter expert on military children's education and has spoken on the topic at events hosted by the National PTA, Military Impacted Schools Association, and the National Association of Federally Impacted Schools, among others. As I said, she's a Navy spouse, has a daughter in high school and a son in college. So we will have time for you at the end to ask questions of the panel, so be thinking about those. So I'd like to start with you, Jim. Can you talk a little bit about the mission of the Collaborative for Student Success, and what do we mean when we talk about academic standards, and why are they important?
First off, thank you for having me. This is a great gathering, and it was really, I thought, particularly great to hear from Ann before this. That was very informative for me too. The Collaborative is a nonprofit organization, and our tagline essentially is that we advocate for high standards, a aligned assessment, and strong accountability systems so that every kid is ready for college or career. That's our tagline. I like to go deeper than that and to say what we really do, with that as our tagline, is we are a comms organization in the education reform space. We have built a series of coalitions, one of them being Military Families for Higher Standards. There's a wonderful woman named Christy Ham who leads that effort for us, and she has built a strong group of spouses who are very concerned about this issue. We also have a series of faith leaders who are concerned about this, and teacher champions, as we call them, that are throughout the 50 states that advocate for the same thing. We were brought in initially in what Ann was talking about, which was the Common Core fight. A lot of our funders looked at the discourse that was happening then, and it was unbalanced, and it was becoming immensely political. And so our job was to come in and advocate for consistent standards across the country. And we did so using those voice groups, using in-state political work, and also a series of communications tactics in digital and social media. Your second point was around
why are they important?
Why are they important?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the standards are important because you have to have some sort of glide path. I think teachers need a glide path. School administrators need a glide path that tells them what are the essential steps that my child needs to take at each grade level so that they're ready when they graduate from college or from high school for the next stage in their life, whatever that might be. The standards themselves are highly technical. I mean, I don't know how many of you in the room have actually read this, like the Virginia Standards of Learning, where my two daughters go to school. It's like a 100-page document, and it's incredibly dense, and the likelihood is that most parents probably haven't read it, and I don't blame them because it doesn't translate that well. But what is important about that is that are these rigorous? Is there someone who says that these are rigorous standards? And Ann is absolutely correct that over time, I believe that many states have tweaked them, they've adopted them, they've revised them, but the bar has risen across the board. And I think that was the overall goal of having these kind of educational standards, is that bar does get raised. Are we holding our kids to a higher expectation as they go? Many times I think there's some conflating between rigor and the standard. The standard may be high, the rigor to get there may be very different between the school that you go to from state to state to state. And I think that's where the parents really need to be engaged and know the questions that need to be asked to meet that standard.
Okay, so with that introduction in mind on the standards, Eileen, talk about why we found this is such an important issue for military families and why military families need to be concerned about it, and just what's NMFA's involvement in this issue.
Sure. Well, I think the videos that we watched earlier really highlight why this is something that NMFA decided that we needed to become involved in, that we have heard from families who tell us that, their children struggle following a PCS move because they've landed in a school where the standards are inconsistent with what they had in their previous location and through no fault of their own. And as you said, the last thing parents want is for their children to be disadvantaged by their parents' military service. And so, and to Jim's point, even though the standards are technical and it's difficult for a lot of us to digest them, I think that parents still feel like they want to have that basic understanding of what their children are expected to, what level they're expected to achieve, so that they can support them in their academic goals. And so one thing we also hear from parents, especially as they move to new locations, is that they don't understand what the standards are. They don't understand what their children are expected to accomplish at each grade level. And that's particularly acute among our most mobile military families. That was something that you mentioned, our survey, and that was another data point that was really striking in our survey, that the families that move most frequently, the families that have been in their current location for 3 years or less, are the ones that are least likely to feel like they understand the standards or are equipped to help their kids succeed. So it really, it's really struck us that it's important for all of us, whether we're nonprofit advocates or people at the school level, to do what we can to help families understand what the standards are, and encourage states and school districts to adopt high standards, and also, as Jim said, to make sure that those standards are being met and the schools are adequately resourced.
So Chuck, one resource that's available to military families are the school liaison officers, and especially important in that school transition. So can you talk about the school liaison officers and how they do support military families during the transition, and what's their information capacity regarding standards?
Okay. Well, there couldn't be a more exciting time to be a school liaison or to be a military parent. And I'll qualify that because of what's happened over the last 15 to 18 years. The Compact on Education is something that we didn't have. And as Joyce referred to, NMFA has been 50 years as a advocate for our military families. 20 years ago, MSEC came on board as an advocate, and then there are 100 other organizations, nonprofit, non-government organizations, that are working for us to help make things work, to listen to you, our families, and to put systems in place. The biggest thing is that we now have 50 states that have signed a compact, and when you move from state to state, you have at least a good chance to be able to make the transition. Is everything perfect? No. But what we need from you is to become informed parents. The school liaisons, their primary purpose isn't to be your advocate, is to inform you on what you need to watch for, what you need to do to prepare yourself and to be prepared for your children's moves. A couple examples. The compact does things by law in 50 states that we used to have to get backroom handshakes between states to do, and we had superintendents would do it before the compact came on board, but that wasn't the way to do business. But two things can make the compact not work. One is the receiving school isn't aware of the compact. People continue to change out and move, and there are two organizations that are responsible for making sure that school is educated on the compact. It's the superintendent themselves and the State Department of Education, and it's the installation. And that's where your school liaison comes in, and to make sure that the educators are aware and are using it. The third person that needs to know is you, the parent. And I can't count how many times I've heard people say, I didn't even know we had school liaisons, and I didn't know there was a military compact on education. To go what the colonel was saying earlier, gosh, we beat ourselves to death trying to get the word out. And there's so much white noise out there with so much information, you generally don't absorb it until you need it or you realize that it directly impacts you. And we target in every medium possible to get it to the parent, to the active duty member, to the stay-at-home parent, through the educators, to you in the book bags heading home, web engagement, and we constantly listen for that. But now let me give you two examples. I pulled these fresh from the field from a couple of my school liaisons. We had a student, PCS from, should I use the states?
Sure.
California, senior, arrives in Florida. He thinks he's a senior, but Florida doesn't have a non-college preparatory high school diploma. In California, he was on track. His plans were he's going to go into a trade, and at most he was going to go to a 12 to 18-month trade school. And they had a track diploma process for that. He was a sophomore when he got to Florida. But the school wasn't aware of the compact, and neither was the parent. And this was recently, and the compact's been in place for 7 years in most states, and you would think that it would be common knowledge, particularly in a strong military community. The school liaison, the SLO, and the educator got together, and what they ended up doing is he graduated on time, but he graduated with the class at Florida. He walked, but his diploma came from the school he came from in California. And that worked perfectly. It was the state's requirements didn't match up, but the compact gave us the vehicle to be able to help that young student achieve and go the direction that he wanted to go. And the SLO follows up. It's neat how when you develop that relationship, the school liaison is still in contact with his family, and he's almost done with his certification in diesel repair, and that's been a lifelong goal of him. And it's a rich field now with lots of job opportunity. Second one that didn't turn out as well. I've heard gifted, talented, special ed. That is a particularly challenging PCS to make. So we have a family, PCS, from Virginia Beach to Japan. And they're in a talented program that's run completely different than it is in the other school system. We run into this in many states. At the losing school, is tested and validated that he's 5th grade, but he is functioning at the 9th grade or above level. Gets to the next installation, and he's brought into the talented, the gifted program, but the program's run completely different, and is not getting the same level, and there's no workaround with that. It's because he's in a talented program, a gifted program at the receiving base, but not getting the same level. So it works, but like Jim is trying to do, we've got other pieces that need to be worked on. And again, the breakout that Horace is going to be on, or school liaisons, you can get specific questions. With each family, there's a different story. And if you PCS once as a military family with kids, you have your story. And I PCS several times with 4 kids who came through DODEA and different states' schools, and it was always interesting.
So how does a family who's transferring from, Japan to Virginia Beach, for example, I'm going to just reverse your story. How does a family find out about the school liaison, and what should be their expectations of how that school liaison officer can help?
Usually, the family gets frustrated, and the school will refer them to the school liaison. Day to day, the school liaison is in preventative mode. It's about relationship building. The school liaison has worked hard and long to build the relationship with every educator that serves their area. In the Navy, it's a 50-mile radius or an hour drive, whichever comes first. And so it comes from that direction, the educator referring them to the school liaison, going to the family support center, or the advertising, they reach out to the school liaison. What's interesting is a lot of families are touched by the school liaison but don't realize it. And we don't really get concerned that when we say that we read surveys that say only about 20% of the families had heard about a school liaison, because it's that preparation work that makes the school liaison program successful. It's getting the information in the schools. It's used in programming like we've been doing the last 15 years that MSEC and other organizations put out to educate the educators on the challenges to be prepared, and those systems are in place. The web presence. When the member gets the assignment, first thing they do, they're calling home. The answer to the phone at home is, hey, we're going to Japan, we're going to Texas, and before the conversation's done, the member on the other phone's doing a Google search. Tell me everything about something Air Force Base. And what we fought to do with our resources and information is to put that up so when it comes in Google searches, when I do an assessment on an installation, they have to be within 3 hits of their information coming up, and that information is all the school liaison information that has 27 different specific criteria, and it's also linked to the public schools and other schools that service that installation, and we link back and forth so that whether you realize it or not, you're touched by the school liaison. And we put that information in that mode. The other thing the school liaison does is train and make information available for the parent to be the advocate for their child's education. By no means is SLO the advocate for your child's education. We're a conduit for helping connect you to those resources. And just one thought, I know I'm talking too long, but the parent that avoids challenges or is ready to answer the challenges for a PCS, prepared for that PCS when they got at their duty station or leaving. And how I mean that is, how many of you build a portfolio for each of your children where you keep information in there, and then when you move from installation to installation, you update that with information? It could be in a binder. I've seen folders, seen different things used. So when that assignment comes up and then you arrive at the school and you don't have your child's official record hasn't made to the school, you're in there talking to the counselor. Oh yeah, they did this, and oh, here's the type of math. Here's the textbook they use. You ran off a copy of the inside of the page. you prepare for your PCS when you arrive at your last duty station, and it's important. And again, it's like cutting the grass. It always grows. We continue to have to do it and train parents, to train educators, and to keep it moving.
So I'm going to ask Chuck and Eileen one question, and then I'm going to open up to the floor here. And following on, as Chuck talked about the school liaison officers as a resource in transitioning. So, and we do. You get orders and you Google what's coming when in that new state. So how can a military family with school-age children, when they get orders to that new state, how can they beef up their knowledge? Where can they go to learn about are the academic standards the same as the school their kids are currently attending? What are some, we heard questions this morning about information. What are some information resources you would recommend to that transitioning family? And either one of you can start.
So, Joyce, you asked me to answer, but I would actually refer to Jim as well, because I know the Collaborative has maintained a website with information about every state's standards that is really very accessible and gives information that is digestible to the average parent who's moving to a new location. It provides up-to-date information about not only state standards, but where they are in implementing those standards and their assessment. So I'm talking for you. But,
no, that's great. Go keep going. You're doing great.
But so that's kind of that's one formal resource that that I would encourage parents to look to. I think there's the informal network of military spouses that we all know is out there, but we all want to be a little bit careful of. I mean, we're the best resources for each other, but it's important, I think, when you're asking questions about school quality, which in some respects are inherently very subjective, to be to be knowledgeable about where you're getting your information.
I'll get it.
Yeah, we're hoping, it's not one of our panelists' phones.
We're hoping it wasn't me, but I don't think it is. So, social media has become, I think, both a lifesaver and, a danger for military families as they embark on these moves. Just because there's information out there on just about any topic, about any community, and it's very important, I think, for military families to be informed consumers of information when they're looking for information about schools and school districts.
Jim?
Yeah, thank you for plugging our work, and
It's persistent, whatever it is.
oh, it's not you. Thanks. And in return, I'm also going to plug some friends of ours at the Fordham Institute, because when you do talk about like the difference between like what is the difference between the standards in Louisiana and in Arkansas, as I mentioned before, like these are huge documents and they're very complex. But what does that mean for a parent? And I think there's still challenges there on translating that. The Fordham Institute did a very good job recently in August of doing something called State of the State Standards. And it just came out, and they had their experts look at that across the board, because there has been so much change between states as they've revised these over the last several years. And they looked at it from very interesting perspectives, like that I think parents could read a 2-page overview of the difference between a state as opposed to 84 pages of text, and say, these experts were talking about this state is not, let's say, like reading comprehension. Like in this state, they don't demand that a certain skill, like understanding how an author is going to come to a conclusion after a certain reading, whether that needs to be done with a Shakespeare text or with Diary of a Wimpy Kid. And he's not here today, is he? The guy who wrote Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I love your books, don't get me wrong. But if there's a difference between a kid who can demonstrate that capability with the Shakespearean work as opposed to Diary of a Wimpy Kid, that skill is vastly different. And some states don't require that you do it differently. And that creates a delta between the capability of one kid over another. And this report that Mike Petrelli and his team have come up go into that some. So
I want to follow up on that because, you know, we've talked right now about state standards, but everybody in this room will tell you that what's happening at the ground level in the classroom and the school may be very different than what somebody at the state level is expecting to have happen. And that military families, what came through loud and clear on our survey is that when military families talk about standards as one component of school quality, it is only one component of school quality. You know, one parent in our survey explained it, different standards at each school, different resource pools, so differing levels of activity available, different cultures, so different expectations. And that, I think, is a common story we hear from military families. So how can military families find that school level information about progress toward meeting state standards? You heard Ann Holton talk about there's a lot of hard things to measure, but just how do families find that granular, that school level information?
So for years, schools have, or states have issued school report cards, but they've varied greatly, and they've been buried usually on websites, and they're tough to find, and they don't have all consistent information across. The Every Student Succeeds Act, which states are now implementing throughout the country, requires that states have a school report card, and by December of this year, they have to have that submitted to the federal government, and it has to have input from parents on what goes into that information. So that is a giant leap in the right direction, I think, on school report cards, because it is required. And as Ann said, a lot of times the federal government punches above their weight for how much money they actually provide a state, but they do carry a stick sometimes to demand something like that. And the push is to get those school report cards to have more than just how does my kid do on a test, but what does the safety situation look like at a school? What does the teacher environment look like at a school? And a whole host of other social, emotional issues too. And there are a lot of groups that are looking at this right now. I know Learning Heroes is one that's vastly involved with what the school report cards look like. But I think this is a great move in the right direction to hold states accountable for what a school looks like, and it can be a huge tool for a parent who's moving into a new state.
Eileen, you have anything to say, or I'm going to open it up?
Well, I just think that it's, you know, when we're talking about quality of education, we're talking about a whole host of issues, some of which are easier to measure than others. But we know from talking to military families that while their children's academic and educational achievement is very important, so is their social and emotional well-being as they're in schools. And some schools certainly are more knowledgeable about the challenges facing military-connected kids than others. And so I think part of our goal today is to help empower all of you to know how and where to speak up for your kids, both at the classroom level and then all the way up to the state level. You know, one of the challenges that we as military families have is that we don't always vote in the state where we live, and we're not always familiar with the different levels of policymaking in the states where we're stationed. And so, you know, but as Ann Holton identified, there's lots and lots of stakeholders and lots of avenues to make an impact into the quality of your child's school, but it's becoming knowledgeable, and because sometimes you don't have control over where you're going to be stationed or where your child's going to go to school. So then the second part of that equation is, what can I do as a parent to maximize my child's experience in this school and make sure they're as prepared as possible when we move on?
Okay, so perfect segue to audience questions. Anybody have a question for our panelists?
Joyce, can I add something that real quickly?
Real quick.
Just like Eileen said, you can get information to the state level very easily. Our school liaisons, they work with the three customers. It's the commander, it's the educator, and it's you. And we take the information, if it's a local school district issue, we take it and work it with the local school district, or if it's with the principal, we work at the principal level. However, if it's bigger than that, it's a part of the system, they'll take it to the state. And Virginia, California, Texas, Florida are 4 states that are very big military states, but they're also very, very concerned about the education of our children. And there are forums that the installation commanders and the school liaisons sit in, and I guarantee you, if there's an issue coming from the state of Virginia, and the last year's legislation proved it, there was a challenge when our families were coming in a TLF situation. They have to register their child in the school district that they were in TLF in, and then, oh, by the way, when they moved off base, the end of 30, 60 days, they were going to another school. And Virginia has legislation in place now that takes care of that. And the only reason that happened is because school liaisons brought it up to the state level, and with Virginia having a person in that role full-time, it got heard, and it now is a part of the state law, and it's policy. But that, I mean, again, you can use your school liaison to help work those kind of things at a local level and all the way up to the state level.
Okay, I'm going to start with this lady here because she didn't get to ask a question before, so.
Hi there, thank you. I'm Julie Shepard, military spouse, and I'm also the advocacy chair for the Nova District PTA. Happy to be here. So to Holly's point, where she was talking about gifted education, I kind of experienced that same thing moving from Fairfax County to San Diego. So I'm from here, always been here, student was in level 4 services here, and I get out there and I'm working with the school liaison very closely before the move, over the summer, trying to get my son situated, and I hit a roadblock and I could not get him placed in the right math level class. They would not place him in the gifted level courses. I ended up having to move him into private school and grade accelerate him, and now we're back after 1 year, and now he's back in the grade he was supposed to be in the gifted education here. So like, and I know about the compact, I knew about it, and I still couldn't get anywhere with that. And my issues were raised because I was advocating out there in California, but like, we're still not doing everything that we need to be doing to get that out there, is my point. So what do we do about that?
Those are the 2 areas that you mentioned, the gifted program and special education. The gaining state adheres to the compact, but the gaining state's systems and processes are built much differently in the way they administer it. And they're meeting the requirements, but it comes out different when you're moving from place to place. One place that our school liaisons, out of those 50 states that signed the compact, they meet annually. It coming up in October. And then each state, usually it's determined by the service with the largest population. For instance, Virginia is a Navy lead. There are 13 states and territories where the Navy is a lead, and then the other services have the other states broken out. And so we go to that 2 full days of meetings with the compact of each state, and we bring up issues to talk there. And that's one of the issues we're taking, to be able to talk and hear it and see if there are other solutions that the compact can address. There is also, I said, it's an exciting time to be working this position as a school liaison for the military, but it's an exciting time for parents that you're being heard. There's the next week, the DoD Quality of Life Liaisons are meeting. They do their annual plan. It used to be called the Dr. Chu Top 10 list, and they're looking at that. And amazingly, we thought education was fixed, but it's not because of things like that. So next week, there are 3 specific agenda items that we're going to be addressing with them. So all 4 services and DoD officers that are engaged will come in and see how we can work, DoD can work with the states, or get the commission to work on those things.
And there is a breakout session this afternoon on the compact, and so issues like that you might want to bring up there as well. But I think there is a process, but it's best known by districts that deal with a lot of military kids, and best known by parents who've had to experience this. Yes, back here.
I'm Jamie Albers, a school liaison officer on Fort Belvoir. A question, or maybe if you could give us some suggestions. When a military member PCS, you have to have your in-processing checklist and your out-processing checklist. Some of the bases I've worked at, I've been able to work with the base commander to put that on, but how can we maybe start the conversation that would be across all branches? Since the education of our children are extremely important, that's how every family could connect with a school liaison officer.
So you're saying make it a part of the service members'
DOD, yes.
PCS checklist. Thoughts?
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I know that was an Army slow, and the Navy on the 24th of August just made it mandatory. BUPERS, our personnel office in Millington, Tennessee, made it mandatory to put on there the child care contact information, the school liaison contact information, and the youth sponsor contact information on every set of orders automatically. So it will do the same thing that the Army's process is doing. Every sailor will get the information.
Okay, right over here.
My name is Christy, and I'm a Coast Guard spouse, so I'm going to use the Coast Guard word. My question is about the communication piece. So I think it's probably mostly for Chuck, but we call them ombudsman, but other services call them different things, key spouse, whatever. I just wanted to know what your thoughts or how you work with ombudsman or key spouses to disseminate the information, because I see a lot of information, a lot of resources, and I see a lot of people in need, but I've always felt like the hardest part was connecting those two, and I think people like ombudsman and grassroots things in each command are a really good way to do that, and I think putting resources towards those types of programs is really important.
Very true, and again, that's one of the things we check at our installations is an information flow. A good information flow has the ombudsman on it. It has the chief petty officer's list on it. It has the every key organization on the base. And again, we push a lot of information. We try to package it easy to read. And I don't know, probably any service that doesn't do it, and it's frustrating to us. And this is where forums like this are helpful. How can we get information to you? And in the breakouts, pass that on to the folks hosting the breakouts. We listen, and we try to change the message to make sure it gets to you in a way it's going to capture you, just grab you, and you're going to do something with it. But we use every medium, from Facebook to Twitter to email, and we still use the old way. We make flyers up, we put posters out, and bulletin boards. But yes, it is important, communication, and we visit those organizations. We'll sit down with the ombudsman a couple times a year, and any of the senior spouse groups across the services, and get information out. But you help us, tell us how is the best way for you to get it.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carla Driscoll. I am a Marine, and my husband is also a Marine, and we have 3 children. One is 20, the other is 15, and a 13-year-old. My issue was with the report cards that the schools were receiving, and I thought at first that was such a great idea because it helped me know the progress of that school. The problem then became with my daughter, and I know a lot of, I did deal a lot with helping my son through from 4th grade all the way until graduation, and where the report cards fell in with that. However, with my daughter, who was a bright student in transferring schools, where the school report cards come in as a disservice to my daughter was that the school was focused on how well she would perform in that current grade because they didn't have honors classes that she could take. And so I did do what you also suggested, which was to create a portfolio, which I had all of her report cards of the final years and the unofficial transcript, syllabus from the different classes that she was taking, And I think that that was such a great idea that you introduced, and I think that school liaisons can incorporate that into their systems so that it could prepare parents moving their children. And I don't think that that information is out there enough, just like a lot of parents don't know that there are school liaisons on their bases. So I think that those ideas would help improve the system that parents have to go through when planning all these PCS moves.
Thank you. Hannah, there's one right back there.
Sarah again. I'm a Coast Guard spouse, and I hear lots of conversation about DoD and an installation and your school liaison being attached to your installation. So I guess my question is, what's a Coast Guard family to do? We don't usually get, assigned, we don't live on a post. We don't usually go to a specific post school. So how do we get, how does the DHS side of things work into that?
Okay, I've got somebody to answer a question, or Chuck's going to answer it.
We have a dynamic relationship with the Coast Guard. We have 3 maritime partners, and it's the Marines, the Navy, and the Coast Guard. And occasionally a merchant marine will cross the door of a school liaison. And when you're assigned or attached to one of our installations, our school liaisons will service you. And pretty much, I think that's the general rule across the services. If you're within the catchment area of the installation, they're going to take care of your family. I work with Lisa Johnson. She's family programs at the headquarters Coast Guard. And you have an ombudsman that's here today who's been an ombudsman. She can share with you so sometimes the resource is far away from you, but we'll get you in contact with the closest service resource. And it could be a guard armory that would be your closest contact for where you're at. But yes, we will service your families regardless of what your orders say.
All right, Eileen wants to.
Well, and I think probably the challenge that you've run into, I would assume that oftentimes you're maybe assigned to a school where there isn't a large military population, there isn't a concentration of military kids. Maybe you're the only Coast Guard family at that school, and this is a lot of the challenges that we run into, right? That a school isn't familiar with a highly mobile population. They're not accustomed to making those accommodations, and that's where the Interstate Compact and your State Compact Commissioner can really help you out as well. That because the compact's been adopted by all 50 states plus DC, and DODEA also follows the provisions of the compact. There is a state compact commissioner in every state who's available to support you and provide information about how to kind of navigate those compact related transition issues.
But correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm a Coast Guard family living on Fort Belvoir, I'm going to put Fort Belvoir on the spot, I can come see you, correct? And get help. So it's geography as well as service. And so I think that's what I've noticed over the years is that our school liaisons really do want to reach out and support families in those communities regardless.
In my reference,
of what,
according to orders, most of the Coast Guard are working for DHS, but there are Coast Guard that are on DoD active duty orders. And we don't care what kind of orders you're on, our school liaisons are going to answer your questions that are going to help you. Because I want to get a call from about one of my SLOs turning you away or turning away a Coast Guard family, and I don't get those calls. Their supervisor complained
Because if you called us and said one of his SLOs has turned you away, he'd get a call from us, and that wouldn't be pretty. Jenna, over there. Patty?
Yeah. This might be an outlier type of question, but it popped in my head, so I thought I would share it. So when you were saying we really need to get the information to the people that need it, there's all these resources, but how do we get it to the people that need it? I would imagine that part of that, people that need it besides parents, we could also do some outreach to middle and high school students because they talk to each other, right? So how do you do that? How do you make that happen? If we look at the existing structure that exists now, well, existing and exist. We would say that there is the student-to-student program through MSEC that at least might be a good start. And it could be that we speak to them to say, could you have some type of a focus group or a forum or something towards the end of the school year for all of the kids and their parents that are leaving to go somewhere else, for the military kids that are leaving to go somewhere else. And that's where you talk about bring in an interstate compact rep, bring in, you know, some of the do's and don'ts, bring in the collaborative for student success or military families for high standards. I think that that's another avenue of getting the information out, because kids share information with each other quite a bit, and they're pretty sophisticated about it. Just an idea.
Well, and thank you, and there are representatives of many of those groups here, including MSEC, that you'll hear from this afternoon. One question there. Jenna, you're going to work yourself for lunch.
Actually, I want to piggyback off of her question. What she just brought up is a very important piece, because she wants to get the information also to the students. Even the surveys and a number of the studies that have been done recently, to include the Lexington study, they received a lot of comments from the students, from the staff, from the teachers, et cetera, but not from the students. And therefore, a lot of that information was not generalizable to the other side. So I'm one of those people who's Norm Solomon, retired military officer, 4 children as well, who serves as a tutor for military families as well as adult education for those students who did not graduate high school and are now coming back. So I see this every day. So I'm currently doing a study that I'm trying to reach out to the military families, and all I want to do is reach out to the families. I'm paying for it totally out of pocket so that it's not biased. And I was just informed yesterday that I cannot do exactly what you said because it's considered research, and unfortunately, it's not DODEA, so DODEA won't support it either. And I'm going, but look at your own survey here. Look how many students attend public schools. And unfortunately, we cannot take the very next step because when I say we, I'm saying DOD, I still feel like I'm in the military, but I know veteran you're not. But as a whole, we are not responding to the needs of the active duty, to the students themselves. And when we try to do something about it, we're somewhat blocked by current regulations, et cetera. And I'm just trying to find out, is there anyone out there, either in, NMFA or MSEC, et cetera, who could assist me with just maybe finding a sponsor to conduct a study to do exactly what she just said.
So let's talk offline.
Okay.
One more question. Steve?
Hi, my name is Steve Scroggs. I'm on the Board of Governors with National Military Family Association, but I make a living working for Value Options Federal Services, and we currently have the military OneSource program, 24/7 in 3 locations across the country on both coasts. Just yesterday, we had a group of 20 folks from the Defense State Liaison Office that came and got a tour and a presentation for a couple of hours. Many people think about Military OneSource as just where you go for non-medical counseling, personal relationships, but there's this whole Zen chart of services that include specialty consultations and assistance for relocations from assignment to assignment, not just military installation to military installation, but guard and reservists from someplace just miles and miles away from military installation to another kind of location that is going to impact the military family and their students. And the one thing that I just want everybody to understand, and because of this discussion, I'm going to go back. I do know we've got those specialists, not only for exceptional family members working with the DOD's Exceptional Family Member Program, but also with relocations as a special kind of service. And those are dealt with by master's level folks who have these additional experiences, but they've got this whole team of researchers that basically, I mean, people have sort of laughed. Well, what it does is when military families call them, it's almost like they outsource their to-do list, you know, whether it's finding apartments, but also information about the next school district that they're going to. But I can tell you, most military members or family members, they will call. We hear the calls all the time. It's because of counseling. So what I am hoping, and I want to talk Chuck and Jim with you, you know, during offline, but make sure that our organization is totally wired on all of your points of contact, and that we can share this kind of information. But I mean, at 2 o'clock in the morning, and even if you've got a military spouse who is Filipino and needs Tagalog, there's interpretation services to actually at 2 o'clock in the morning do a 3-way call to talk about these various issues. So anyway, just want to make sure everybody takes advantage of this resource.
So I'm going to put Steve on the spot, but also give him some ammunition to take back to Military OneSource.
Please.
How many of you have used Military OneSource as a resource for your children's education?
Since 2011. I can't
Raise your
go-
hands high. I want to see. I mean, all right. So Steve, there's some work. So tell Steve what you've liked, what you were looking for that you couldn't find, because that's a conduit into information that DoD's paying to help you.
And I would have loved it if I'd seen a whole lot of hands going up.
Well,
Because
so there's work to be done.
Yeah.
So we're heading close to lunch. I think I just got the 5 minutes. So I have some questions, and we asked some of these questions on the survey, but I just like to get a sense of the room a little bit, and I'd like to come back to our original conversation about standards. And, you know, because we've talked a lot about how do parents get the information they need to help their kids. So on that specific issue of standards, where are you getting information about the standards that your children's school, your children's state are using? So how many of you received no information, the last PCS move you made, how many of you received no information about academic standards that your school would be using? No information. All right, that's pretty scary. How many of you did get information on standards from your child's teacher? Okay. Before or after requested a meeting? Well, I would hope, I'm thinking proactively, but you know, that this was part of that process. And this kind of gets to what Eileen had noticed about the survey, that families who were moving around weren't getting that information. How many of you got it from one of the resources that Jim mentioned, like the state report cards or the school reports cards, website like Great Schools, something like that? Okay, so you're searching for it online. How many of you got it from somebody at your school? Not many. So we're still, okay, so there's work to be done on, how many of you got information on standards from the school liaisons? Okay. So folks who are interested in conveying information to military families about standards, here's some information that might be useful. Military OneSource, here's some information. How parents are getting that information, because parents keep talking about, my child was at one level at this school, we moved, and they were either ahead or behind, and I didn't know how to help. Knowing what the standards are, knowing what the expectations are a way to help that child in that situation. So I have one more question that kind of gets to that preparation, and this was one that, you know, a lot of our families on our survey talked about. Last PCS, pick one child. Was that child ahead of their new classroom peers? Yes? Last PCS, was the child behind? Okay, so we're seeing that frustration that happens. So how many of you, and no, we asked who the school liaison, how many of you have connected with a school liaison officer? All right, so school liaison officers notice. So we have, this afternoon, we have breakout sessions. A lot of questions today about the compact, what it does, what it doesn't do, how it can help, how do we know about it, what are the ways that we can use the compact to elevate concerns. There's a breakout session on that. There's a breakout session on special ed, a breakout session on, and I know I'm going to forget one, the break on additional resources for you, and are there 3, 4?
There's 4 breakout sessions.
What's the 4th one? Academics, I knew, I just saw Patty Ewan. So academic standards, and this is around mostly math and literacy, but deeper conversation about what those standards are and what it means and how do we help our kids with that. So we run all 4 breakout sessions twice. Your sessions are on your name tag, which one you go to when. Lunch will be served in here. You have the silverware in the middle of the table. The wait staff will be coming in to provide lunch. We've made some folks for you to connect with. Steve, our school liaisons. Raise your hands again, school liaisons. And our panelists are here. NMFA staff, we'd love to hear your stories, love to hear your information. This is an ongoing effort for us. So thank you to our panel. And enjoy lunch.
I hope everyone's enjoying their lunch. Sorry to interrupt the conversations. I just want to proceed with the program, but please continue to eat. Here at the National Military Family Association, we are celebrating the 15th year of our Operation Purple program and the 10th year of our Operation Purple family retreats. And you've seen a little bit from the retreats in the 2 videos that we showed you earlier. But I want to show you a video that's a little different than those. It was also shot at a family retreat, but a little bit different, so enjoy.
The perfect school for my kids would be one that helps them transition into a new environment really easily.
My perfect school would have an arcade, a pizza buffet, and for all the good kids would be served ice cream.
Mint and chip ice cream for every single meal. Pizza.
So what I really love is if you could have like a wizarding school, obviously like flying and learning charm.
Bees and flowers and a sandwich and lemonade. Unicorns everywhere. There would be a place for puppies and animals so you can help them.
At my perfect school, I think it would probably be teachers to be more educated to what the students want.
One-on-one time with the teachers and students, I feel like a lot of students fall behind because they don't quite understand and they're too afraid to ask in a group setting.
Well, if it's my perfect school, I kind of like it, so yes, there is homework.
I would have mats in the hallways that to go to our locker we could do like tumbling.
At my perfect school, there'd be a way to get my pilot's license and a set curriculum so military and mobile families won't have to adjust.
That they would have a hot tub and a giant pool, and you can also do whatever you want.
I love the kids. I hope you're preparing your response because I'm about to ask you about your perfect school as well. And now I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Virginia State Senator Scott Serval. Now, Senator Serval has been a huge part in making sure Fairfax County schools are top-notch. He's been fighting for better teacher salaries, improved school infrastructure, and more state and federal funds to provide opportunities for every child to reach his or her full potential. He's a lifelong resident of the Mount Vernon community and an advocate for the 36th District, serving Fairfax, Prince William, and Stafford counties, and the towns of Occoquan, Dumfries, and Quantico. So I think we've covered almost everyone in this room here. Please welcome Senator Scott Serval.
Thank you for the introduction. And thank you for inviting me to come speak to you all today about state policy, which I think probably isn't always on everybody's radar. I'm going to pull up my notes here on my phone. So, and I want to thank Eileen Huck for, where's Eileen? There she is, for inviting me today. I think part of the genesis of this was I was knocking doors. I've knocked about 25,000 doors in 3 elections now. And I was out, I ran into Eileen's door. I think your son was registered, right? I think that's why I was knocking on your door. But in any event, Eileen and I, our kids knew each other from softball and soccer. I think your son was a soccer ref, I think. She, I remember when we were talking, she mentioned to me that she wasn't registered to vote, active duty military, et cetera. And I was like, well, I do represent, even though you live here, I am your senator, even though you can't vote for me. And it got us talking about state policy and active duty military interaction, and that's partly what I'm going to talk to you about. Just really quick about myself. I grew up, as you heard, in Northern Virginia. My father went to Mount Vernon High School. I went to West Potomac High School. My grandparents moved here in 1936 when Fairfax County had 40,000 people in it. But I graduated from West Potomac. Then I went to James Madison University for college, and I graduated from law school at UVA about 3 years after that. Came home, lived in Arlington for a couple of years, and then got married and moved back to my grandparents' house, where I live today, about 2 doors down the street from where I grew up. And growing up in the D.C. metro area, especially down in Mount Vernon, there was always a lot of active duty families down in Mount Vernon. I always had a lot of friends that were coming and going through high school because people were getting transferred in, transferred out. Played quite a few rounds of golf on the Fort Belvoir golf course, and some friends could get me in there. So always been interacting with military families my whole life, being in this area, and then getting into the legislature even more so. I represent the 36th Senate District. I was in the House of Delegates for 6 years, which is that's the lower house in Virginia, and then I moved up to the state Senate in 2015, and I took the place of Senator Toddy Puller. I don't know if anybody recognizes the last name, but Senator Puller married a guy named Lewis Puller right before he went off, shipped out to Vietnam, and he got his father was Chesty Puller. You'll know who Chesty Puller was. And Toddy's husband was in Vietnam, I think, about 2 months, and he stepped on a landmine, got permanently disabled, and she was back taking care of him pretty much in his entire life. And veterans issues were always front and center for Toddy, and she made it front and center for me. So, my predecessor made sure I paid attention to these things. And my district, just so you have a sense of it, you got a little bit of a description of it, but the district I represent is horribly gerrymandered, and everything in Virginia is horribly gerrymandered. I didn't do it. I was in the minority when it happened, and I had no say in it. So my district basically starts roughly near the Wilson Bridge and near Kingstown, if you know where that is, sort of near the Mixing Bowl. It comes right together, goes down through Fort Belvoir, comes right together near Mason Neck, where the 95 crosses over the Occoquan. And then you cross the Occoquan, there's a string of it that goes up Old Bridge Road. There's another string that goes around to the south, around the Potomac. You have to actually have a boat to stay in my district in a couple spots because there's no roads or bridges. But and then you get down to, I have all Dumfries Triangle. You go up 234 all the way to the Manassas landfill, or the Prince William landfill, I have that. So I basically represent the entire Marine Corps base, Quantico, Prince William Forest Park. And then I have 4 precincts in Stafford County. So the district kind of ends where the hot lanes end right now. And then it goes out in 20 minutes in either direction to the east and the west. So it's a rather expansive district, but as you heard, I represent also Fort Belvoir and Quantico. So when I'm out meeting people, I meet a lot of Marines, I meet a lot of Army, to a lesser extent, Navy and Air Force. But when I'm out again, I've knocked 25,000 doors, and when you knock 25,000 doors, you see a lot. And when you're walking along the street, as soon as you see those out-of-state license plates, you know what that means. And so those tend to be houses that I don't knock because I don't know who's there and they're not on my list, but I'll often come into a house where, for example, one person in the house is registered, and I end up talking to the family and find out the rest of the family is active duty, and then I start to hear from people. So, but why should you care about state government? So, you know, we actually have in Virginia, we have a cabinet level position that's devoted to military affairs. We have a veterans secretary. His name, current one is Carlos Hopkins. And I was actually talking to one of his deputies on the way in here just to see if there's anything I shouldn't miss. But, you know, obviously, even though military families active duty tend to be sort of in and out, sometimes in, out, and back in, or in, back, in, out, and back in a third time, and often permanently, when they want to settle down. You know, even though you might not be registered in Virginia to vote, it's still critically important you engage. Obviously, if you're not registered, you're still going to use the roads, and still going to use the schools, and still going to need the services, and it's important that your state government understand what your needs are and is responsive to those, even if you're not getting a mail in your mailbox because you're not a registered voter, even if your door's not getting knocked. So I know you all have been talking a lot about education, and I just had a meeting last week with the staff at Fort Belvoir Elementary. Fort Belvoir actually has a elementary school on base that only children from on base go to, even though it's a public Fairfax County elementary school. And actually, the federal government just gave us $28 million to rebuild it, so we have a brand new school there now. But that was actually funded by the feds mostly, not entirely, but mostly. But the staff there came to me concerned about a couple different things this last week. One was that there's a form I guess everybody has to fill out when you move into a system. You submit that form to the federal government, and that ensures that the locality actually gets money for you being there. That form's kind of important. I think it's about $1,100 a student, but that money is important to your local school system, so they have the money to spend. And at least the staff at Belvoir were telling me, based on their count, they think only about 85% of the families are filling it out. So we're still leaving a lot of money on the table when people don't complete those forms. And that's just one elementary school in a system of 180,000 kids, and there's a lot of others around as well. And they were trying to come up with some ideas of how can we get everybody to get up to 100% and turn those forms in so we can get those dollars. And one of the ideas they gave to me was that they thought systems of a certain size ought to have a dedicated staff member to help advocate for military families within the school system. Because of the issues I think you guys are talking about, they were telling me about how somebody will come in February or March and can't pass an SOL test because they didn't get the right curriculum at the beginning, and they need help advocating for waivers, or they have classes that don't transfer, and they need somebody to help advocate for them within the system on that. And I think right now we have somebody at the state level who's dedicated to that, who I think is here. I'm shaking his hand. There he is, back there. Yeah. And, you know, so right now we have one person to advocate for probably tens of thousands of students, but he could probably use some help. So, huh? Two? Okay. Okay. Right, but Fairfax has, I want to say, at least 10,000 active duty students or more, and doesn't have a dedicated staff member. And yeah, Virginia Beach is, I think, the biggest population in the state, I want to say, of active duty students. But anyway, this was an idea they were giving me that might incentivize people to turn their forms in, as if they could say that, you know, the money was going to be at least in part dedicated to a dedicated staff member. But again, these people came and put that on my radar. It wouldn't have been on my radar if the assistant principal hadn't called me up and then brought in she brought in one mother and a DOD employee, I think, that met with me to put this on my radar. So, you know, there's issues like that. Another thing we've been working on is transferability of licenses. For example, I know last year we passed a bill that gave higher priority to out-of-state teachers who are active duty transferring in to get their teacher license recognized in Virginia so they can get to work as a teacher sooner rather than later. We just passed that law last year to speed that up. I know that as an attorney, I've had some military active duty spouses reach out to me about trying to get the Virginia State Bar to more quickly recognize out-of-state licenses to practice law, because the bar is a nightmare. And the background check process and everything, it's just, 3 or 4 months just to get permission to take the test 3 or 4 months later. And so by the time you've moved into the state and you've done all that, you're about time to leave again. So, and you have to invest in a bar class and all this other stuff. So there's been some talk amongst the state bar about, making better reciprocity for certain people on their licenses instead of making them jump through those hoops. And I know there's a lot of other professions like that where that's an issue in terms of transferability of licenses, and all that is regulated at the state level. And I know I was just talking with the Deputy Secretary for Veterans Affairs in Virginia, and she was telling me that that's an issue that's high on their radar. And I know we passed, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, when I was in the House of Delegates, I know we passed some legislation making it easier for active duty kids to get in-state tuition. Because, sometimes somebody will move in and it's time to go to college, but parents are still active, and I'm pretty sure we passed that about 5 years ago. So there's a whole series of issues like that really don't come on our radar until people put them on our radar, right? So we were talking a little bit earlier, but I get a visit every year, both before session and during session, from my local chapter of MOA, Military Officers Association. And but they always come to me with a list of about 7 or 8 things that they want us to focus on. They usually have a couple bills they want us to carry, and then usually I'll carry 1 or 2. And then during session, they'll show back up with their list and remind us these are their issues again. And I found that to be very effective. And they're also very organized statewide. I mean, they have these meetings with every single legislator in the state. These mostly retired guys, and I say guys because they're mostly men. I don't think I've ever had a MOA female member come meet with me yet. But I will? Okay, yeah. All right. All right. But it's mostly people that have more time on their hands because they're retired. I don't think a lot of these guys are working, and they're sort of doing it partly in their retirement to stay busy. But at least the ones that come and meet with us and come down to Richmond and lobby. So, but I've found that's pretty effective. And also people don't realize, I think, how just reaching out to your member, how much of a difference that makes. I mean, typically most of us are so busy that we don't tend to listen to people who are not in our district. I represent 200,000 people. My salary is $18,000 a year for the state senate. I get one staffer who's paid $57,000, and he's dealing with lots of incoming all the time and outgoing from me. And so he doesn't really have a lot of bandwidth to soak up stuff from outside the district. And so it's important that you contact people who represent the area where you're living, because you're a lot more likely to get a response if they see that address match with the district. But most people are happy to meet with somebody who lives in their district, even have a meeting with them. I mean, I tell them my rules with my staff are, if they live in the district, I will meet them. If they're not in the district, then I need to know more. But if they're in the district, I will have a meeting with them. So it's important to just reach out. And, we're part-time legislators. We're very accessible. Senators or delegates need to meet with both, make sure it's on both their radars. But if we don't know the issues going on, if you don't tell it to us, articulate it to us, then we don't know what's happening. We don't know to do something about it. People have to put these things on our radar. We're dealing with so much. So, it's and just so you understand how I process this. I mean, I as you've already heard when I said at the beginning, I feel like I represent everybody. I don't care whether you vote or not. I represent, my district's now about 210,000 people with population growth. I won my last race by 23%. In my election in 2015, okay, just think about this. I represent 210,000 people. I won by 23%, and the number of raw votes I got to get that margin was 19,000. Okay? So, you start asking yourself, why is that? Well, about 80,000 I represent are children, they can't vote. Then I represent about 30,000 people that are immigrants that aren't citizens yet, not undocumented, but people that can't vote because they're citizens. Between the 2 military bases, I think there's probably about 10 or 15,000 active duty on base, something like that can't vote or don't register in Virginia. I mean, I have the Quantico Marine Corps polling place has maybe 200 votes per election or something. It's a really small turnout. So not many people who live on base register to vote in Virginia. And there's about 10,000 felons that haven't realized they've been reenfranchised, and then there's some other people that are moving around that haven't got the registration caught up with them yet. But there's a lot of active duty in my district who live there but just can't vote. So when you start trying to figure out why am I only getting 19,000 votes and winning by representing 215,000 people, it's because not everybody. Some people are choosing not to vote, but there's a lot of people that aren't registered but live there, and they use the roads, they use the schools, you know, they need all the services the government provide, and I have to represent them whether they choose to vote or not, and whether they're showing up in a poll that I take, you know, or whatever. So, you know, you have to be responsive to them. At least that's the way I approach it. And I think most members you'll find approach their job similarly. So, I mean, that's just a little bit about things from the state level, and I'm happy to take some questions if anybody has any about things. But, you know, I would just encourage you to reach out as much as you can and communicate. Don't be shy about communicating, and don't think that because I'm not registered that means I shouldn't communicate or I can't communicate, or because I don't vote I shouldn't. So that's my main message to you, I think. And lobby. Send your people down to become lobbyists with lists and give us specific things to do. Tell us, do X, Y, and Z. Don't just give us a problem, give us a solution. That makes it a lot easier for us to act on it. So, does anybody have any questions for me? Anyone? Yeah?
So I was really pleased to hear you say that even if you're not registered to vote, but you live in my district, reach out, because I think a lot of military families are afraid because, oh, I vote somewhere else, I can't interact with you. Do you think that sentiment is common among your colleagues in the Virginia legislature?
I think it mostly is. You know, I mean, Virginia, we keep trying to, one of the things you'll hear our governors repeatedly say is that Virginia wants to be the most military, veteran-friendly state in the country, or something like that. We, I think, the highest, either number one or number two in per capita vets in the country. And, you know, a lot of people come back here because of the presence of the federal government to, you know, do defense contracting, et cetera. And so, you know, Virginia is doing all it can to be as friendly as possible. And so I think a lot of members take that to heart and express it in how they represent their constituents. So I would say yes. I can't tell you I've had a specific conversation, but I can just tell you the vibe in the government is we want to do everything we can for vets, and we always have a series of bills every year that we're passing. Seems like almost every year we're passing 3 or 4 things to try and make it better. We will not make veteran pay non-taxable. Sorry. But that would blow too. Yeah, I know. They don't have an income tax there at all, but yeah, that would probably blow too big of a hole in our budget. But that's one I hear a lot. But our budget is on life support as it is most of the time, so I don't think that's realistic. But no, in general, I would say most people feel that way. You just got to tell them where you live. You got to give them the address and say don't be afraid to say you're a constituent, even if you don't vote, right? And I think some people don't call themselves constituents when they communicate. You got to say, you know, I am a constituent, and here's where I live. Make sure they know the address so they connect the dots.
Hi, my name's Amy. I'm a Army spouse. You referred to the money that the federal government gave you for the new school on Fort Belvoir.
Yeah.
And I was thinking earlier as we were having this conversation about the funding for schools in districts that have a large military population. So I guess my question is, how does that break down? Do they take the population of the installation as a whole and figure out what percentage, how much money the federal government is going to give for, because so many military people either live on an installation and therefore are not paying property taxes, or are renters or whatever it is. So how much more money does a school district get, or an individual school get, when they have a large military population from the federal government or from the state rather than the locality?
The answer to that is not nearly enough. My understanding is that when the form is submitted, the payment goes to that school district, not the school within the district, but it goes through the district. So Fairfax County, the money goes to the county, and I believe I want to say it's $1,100. Is that right? Okay. Fairfax County spent, I want to say, $9,000 a kid educating them last year, and so that $1,100 is a fraction of what, you know, ought to be paid. And of course, when you got Fort Belvoir and Quantico sitting there not paying any taxes at all because it's a federal installation, yeah, it definitely puts a drag on system without the money coming in. And I know that's been a bone of contention for some of my school board members, and they've been talking to our congressman about, trying to see what they can do about changing that allocation. But the state doesn't do anything to make up for the loss. Perhaps we should, but well, obviously the federal government should. There's no question the feds should. There's no question the feds should, because it costs a lot more than $1,100 to educate a kid. But there's no makeup for it in the system at all. So.
Hi there, my name is Patty Barron. I'm with the Association United States Army, and I am a Virginia resident now. We retired here 8 years ago and had lived here at Fort Belvoir for probably about 7 or 8 years previous to that. And so the reason why I'm telling you that is because, yes, I understand that maybe the federal lands don't pay into local property taxes, except through impact aid. If you go ahead and fill out that form and you get what you need, and it goes to the district, I understand that too. But a lot of our families don't even live on an installation. Many of our families live off the installation.
Right.
We rented a house while we were there. We purchase clothing and food and entertainment and all of that outside the installation. We are contributing to the income of the state of Virginia. And we also send our kids to the schools as well. The University of Virginia, my daughter went to William and Mary and all of that. So all of the things that I'm saying is that as you make Virginia a more military-friendly place, the tendency then is to come back, because this is very rich in jobs and employment, and we do come back, and then we become a part of your state and pay all the taxes and all of the fees that go along with it. I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, and it's true. I mean, our schools are in part funded by sales taxes and income taxes. If you're paying income taxes, some of the state money that comes back, but unfortunately in Fairfax, the state only pays about 20% of the bill, and so probably about 70% of the overall school budget in Fairfax is funded with property taxes. It's a little different in Prince William. Prince William's a 50-50 state-local thing, but it is partly funded by sales tax and income tax, which people are definitely contributing to, and I appreciate what you're saying about people coming back as well. When I go to the high school graduation at Mount Vernon High School every year, Mount Vernon, one of the things they do at Mount Vernon High School is they play the 5 service academy, or the 5 service songs, and everybody in the room stands up whenever their song is played. There's always about a quarter of that class is either doing ROTC or an academy or enlisting or something, and you can just see the impact of the military at Mount Vernon High School, bigger than, because that serves Fort Belvoir, bigger than any other high school in the county, so I appreciate that. Yeah. Any other questions? There's one.
Hi, my name's Katie. I'm an Army spouse, and I'm also with NMFA. My question to you is, I'm actually one of your constituents. I live in Fort Hunt, so
Excellent.
Close to you. If I were to request a meeting with you, then get a meeting with you, what could I bring to the table to make it a more productive meeting?
Specifics, as I said, if you could tell me this is what my problem is, and either if you have a solution, that's great. If you don't, I mean, of course, I have the resources, and I can reach out to DOE, or I can reach out to the Virginia Department of Veteran Services, or I could probably reach out to Fort Belvoir. They've got people that liaise with me that I could reach out to them and try and solve that problem, whatever it is. But it's always better if you have some kind of specific proposal or idea as to how a problem could be solved, so that I can sort of run that up the flagpole and get that vetted. So that's what I would say. But
So even if I'm an amateur, I don't know, if I don't know how to write proposals, or this is my first time interacting, just a semi-formed idea is helpful.
That's all you need. I mean, I get completely unformed requests all the time. So, I can show you some of the letters I get out of jail, from people wanting me to get them out and stuff, but anything you can provide that would sort of speed the process up in terms of getting it vetted, the better. The more processing it takes on my side in terms of getting it vetted and back. One of the things you learn about legislating, I put in 62 bills last year. We have a 60-day session. We process all of our bills in the first 30 days out of the Senate and the House, and then we flip-flop. But just nobody carries 60 bills. Nobody came close to me. I think the next close to me was like 40. But when you put a bill in, you suddenly realize there's a whole bunch of people that care about this problem you're trying to fix. And all these people pop out of the woodwork that have issues with your proposal. And so if you're actually looking to get something done, it's as important that you get it vetted by as many different stakeholders as possible before you get it anywhere close to proposing it, or else when you propose it, I mean, every time I, touch the internet, it seems like there's 30 internet lobbyists, Google and the AOL and Intel, every tech company on the planet shows up angry that I want to tell somebody what to do on the internet. And I never would have thought they care about that issue, but it turns out there's some connection. I mean, so the more you can get an idea vetted before it's proposed, the better. And so the more formed the idea is, so you can get it in a position to where it gets vetted, the better. And just for example, with the school issue, I mean, so sometimes it's hard to tell whether a problem is like only specific to Fairfax or Prince William or Stafford when somebody comes to me. And so if I'll put in a bill that I think is solving some problem in Fairfax, next thing I know, I'll learn that somebody in Lee County down near Kentucky is angry about it, or that somebody down the North Carolina system down the North Carolina border, it wouldn't work there at all, and they don't want some big state mandate, and it's really a problem that Fairfax needs to fix instead of just the whole state. And then I have to go and bring in my school board members and try and get them to focus on it. So, anyways, I'm not saying that to try and intimidate you or anything with like complexity. Just don't be overwhelmed by that. Just the more specific of an idea you can give me, and it also helps to put it in writing, so that when I have to go give it to my aide, I don't have to, something doesn't get lost in the translation and all that. So that helps too.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And good to meet another constituent.
Hi, sir. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Rajan Rabatham. I'm Air Force, and I might be one of your constituents. I don't know.
Where do you live?
In Prince William County. Is that but off Spriggs and like 234?
Spriggs is one of the lines.
That's what I thought when you said.
Yeah, if you're between Spriggs and 234, you're in my district.
All right, there we
Yeah,
go.
okay.
All right, so I have something for you.
Okay.
Okay. So one of the things that's starting to concern me is the talk about school vouchers and being able to transfer your child anywhere. And to me, that feels like another burden that's going to be put on the active duty community to figure out what school and to learn more about it and how to transfer kids across different lines and different districts, different programs, on top of the challenges that we already face PCSing around. So I'm kind of curious, what are your thoughts on school vouchers and that program coming nationwide or to Virginia?
Vouchers are probably unconstitutional in Virginia. So back when Brown v. Board of Education was going down, they added voters added some language to the Constitution which said that public dollars cannot be spent on private secondary education. And that's in our Constitution. So that's why you've never seen even a voucher proposal proposed in Virginia. However, that's not to say that school choice isn't a phenomena. In Prince William County, it's a lot easier to transfer between high schools or elementary schools than it is in Fairfax or in Stafford. I'm less familiar with because I just picked that up and they haven't filled me completely in on Stafford. But I know in Prince William it's a lot easier to move around within the district.
Right, at the high school level, you can apply to go to another school outside of your district if you provide the transportation.
Right, but there's no, it's not a voucher deal, but yeah, you can transfer. And that's why Battlefield High School, by the way, had the #1 girls and boys soccer team in the United States of America for like 2 years in a row. Everybody wants to play soccer goes to Battlefield. Right. So, I mean, so the vouchers thing is, I don't think is really a real issue, but the transferability is. And that's one of the reasons I think we need to have dedicated staff in the larger systems to help families navigate that process, which is what we were talking about earlier. And I guess Prince William has a dedicated person, but Fairfax doesn't, should have one. So does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, I'm Erin. I'm with MOA, so thank you for the shout out to MOA. And I just wanted to go back, it's more of a comment rather than a question, if that's okay, if that's allowed, to the question the woman back here asked about getting involved with your state representatives, senators. And my comment is one of the best ways to get involved with interacting with your local representatives is getting connected with associations like the National Military Family Association and their government relations department. these people are representing military families, and so we really enjoy getting comments from families who have had boots on the ground, the experience, and collecting trends in these issues, because oftentimes when you have an issue that you want to bring to your representatives, you aren't alone. You are not the only one with that issue, and there's many people who are willing to help and amplify those issues to Congress and the representatives. So maybe you could speak to how you work with individuals and also associations like NMFA, like MOA, when it comes to addressing the common trends and issues with child education, but also with other issues that affect military families.
Yeah, well, a couple of thoughts about that. Number one, when somebody comes to me with an issue that I don't know a lot about, I often, because we don't have staff really. I mean, I got my one staffer who's just dealing with all this, keeping the trains running on time, and it's hard really for him to do policy. There's a couple members who rely on their staff for policy. I don't have time for that. He's too busy. And so a lot of times when you get an issue you don't know a lot about, you'll go to try and find a resource, an organization to be a resource to give you feedback on an issue so you can get it vetted by somebody else who knows a lot more than you do. So, for example, this group could be a resource like that to a lot of people, right? But it's important that people know you exist and that you're out there so that when the issue comes up, they know who to go to. That's one response. The second thing I would say, and I should have mentioned this earlier, but many organizations, when they come during session, just the General Assembly is an insane place, just when you want to think about it for a second, right? I mean, we have a $105 billion budget, and we process 3,000 pieces of legislation in 60 days. We don't work on weekends. So 5 days, and we, just think about how fast we push through all that. We do the same amount of work Congress does in 60 days, okay? And part-time legislature is great. If you don't finish your work, you don't get paid. You can't go home to your job and get paid, so it makes you get your work done. So, unlike Congress. In any event, but for the first 30 days, when we're trying to get our own bills done, like I said, the House and Senate work on their own bills the first 30 days, and then we have crossover and we work on each other's bills, then we reconcile them, and then we're over. So the first 30 days are probably the most intense, and for about the first 2 or 3 weeks, it seems like every single organization on the planet is wanting to meet with us because they've got bills that are up there, right? And so a lot of organizations will have lobby day for their group. So just don't come on Martin Luther King Day, please. That's like gun day and anti-gun day. And there's people marching around our building wearing, AR-15s and sidearms, and people like in their face, with their other don't have gun thing, shirts on and whatever. But other than that day, a lot of groups will come down. They'll meet in the morning. They'll have breakfast or something, and they'll lobby members all morning. They'll have teams they'll sort of figure out who's in what district. They'll give them an agenda of stuff and some talking points to go to members about, give them leave behinds, whatever, stress balls or glasses with their symbol on them or whatever. And they'll come by to meet with you in the morning. And you'll usually get 2 or 3 or 4 people from the organization that want to tell you what you need to do this year for their group. And these little pods of people will meet with like 5 different members, and I guess they'll have like 5 people that have 5 different people that are on their agenda, and then they'll go back and they'll meet for lunch and provide feedback to the head of the organization about how the day went and whether they got commitments out of legislators or whatever. So if you have a lobby day like that, I think it helps the organization get organized and get down there and be effective. And we're down there in Richmond making laws. We're very focused on this stuff instead of like, I had a protective order this morning and a DUI client I had to deal with before I came here. And when I'm in Richmond, I'm focused only on policy, and that's it. So it's a good time while we have our attention, we're focused on this, to come down and lobby us and make us know you exist, right? And just as individual members, you were asking about meetings. I mean, you'd be shocked at how accessible we are in Richmond. I mean, you can practically walk into my office, although they discourage that. But if you call my staff and say, I'm coming to Richmond on, Thursday, can I have a time? Most legislators will set up a time to meet their constituents for 10 minutes in Richmond. And you can have a time to sit down with your member in their office and then get a free tour of the Capitol and sit up in the gallery and get introduced when the session gavels off and some other stuff. It's a second oldest capital and continuous use in the United States of America. It was designed by Thomas Jefferson. There's a lot of history down there. $40 million statue of George Washington in the middle, the first general of the Army, right? It's another way to come down and advocate and make yourself visible when we're really focused on this stuff. So that was a very long-winded answer to your question, I think. Sorry. Okay.
Hey, I'm Shannon, and I worked alongside the team that created the video you just saw about the perfect school. And you were talking about coming to you with vetted ideas, but I could personally attest to we vetted the idea of having wizarding classes in school. So I wanted to bring that to you.
Pizza and ice cream. And
consider the pizza and ice cream. Right. But my question is more a light note to end on is if you were back in school, what would your perfect school be like?
Perfect school. What would my perfect school be like? That's a really good question. I think schools today need to be a lot more digital. I think every kid ought to have a computer. I think that we ought to get rid of all the books, and the teachers ought to let the teachers teach the way they want to teach with the flexibility they feel like they need to meet the needs of their students. And I think school ought to be a lot more interactive. I think it's what kids expect nowadays. And unfortunately, there are very few of our systems that are anywhere close to that yet because it takes money and capital, and you have to retrain all your teachers and stuff. But I think less and a hell of a lot less testing. So unfortunately, by the way, the federal government requires us to do a certain minimum number of tests. I think it's 14. I think the federal government requires, but I think Virginia has double that right now or something on the SOLs. But I'd like to get it down to 0 if we can. So
yeah. No Snapple machines or hot tubs, puppies and kittens.
Arlington County has an Olympic-sized swimming pool in every single one of their schools. It's become kind of a bone of contention downstate, but I think, I could tell you a hot tub story about JMU, but I'm not going to do that. But no, I'm not into hot tubs for K through 12 kids. I don't think they need that either. Anyways, well, thanks for the questions and thanks for the input and having me here today. I appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah.
I kind of wanted to go to Ann Holton's hippie school, personally. Thank you so much, Senator Serval, and thank you for being accessible to our military families. We appreciate it. We're about to head into our breakout sessions, and you probably know this, but check the back of your name tag because that will have your breakout session assignments. We also have NMFA staff members throughout. They'll be at the door to help direct you to the right place. And don't forget to grab a drink and a dessert on your way out and come back here at 2:45 because someone in this room will be the winner of a Microsoft Surface Go, but you have to be here to win. So we'll see you back here at 2:45.